I like to walk around like TED Talks, and I'm trying to imply a TED Talk. My work in the past, I'd say 5 years, has emerged or has been really inspired by all these new virtual online worlds that have emerged in the past decade or so. And so in a way, the projects that I'm showing you this evening, and a lot of my projects, begin out of this joy that I have from the sheer act of exploring these new virtual worlds, many of them online, but not only, like video game worlds. For example, my most famous project, The Nine Eyes of Google Street View, emerged out of this excitement that there was this new, basically the whole world, never before in history had the world been tried to be captured completely, at least from the pedestrian perspective or the street perspective, by anyone. So it's just, in a way that, on one level, it's these new virtual worlds, and on another level, it's just the vastness of them. Around this time, I began a project called Kool-Aid Man in Second Life, where I was exploring Second Life as a giant Kool-Aid Man avatar. And in that project, I also was just excited by the fact that the world was completely user-generated. So it was just a vast expanse of 3D exploration that I can do of a world that was created by its users. To me, it kind of represented this world of desire and the mind. So I'm going to show you two films one that emerged out of my Google Street View project that is based on a true story, and another one that came out of my exploration of video games, and another one that came out of my exploration of video games. The first one is called You, the World, and I, and it's pretty self-explanatory.
One single photograph of her. I don't have one single photograph of her, even though we spent the better part of our youth together, traveling the globe. We hiked Machu Picchu, we crossed the Atacama Desert, we visited the Great Pyramids of Giza, and yet I have not one photo of her. She never let anyone take pictures of her. She said she would rather think of things the way they were in her memory. The truth is, I think she believed a picture could steal your soul, or something like that. Now that she's gone, I wish more than ever I had some sort of record of our time together, something to grab onto, a proof of our love, but I have none. Well, that's not entirely true. There is one photo. Looking at the Mayan pyramids from space, when I remembered something that I had tucked away deep inside the recesses of my mind. A fleeting image came to me. Long before she disappeared from my life, we had taken a hotel on the eastern coast of Italy. I was watching her from our first floor balcony when a Google car drove by. I recalled chuckling to myself at the time. Someone had finally succeeded in taking her photograph. For weeks I tried to remember the address of the hotel. I spent days upon days at the computer, cruising up and down the coast. And then I found her. That Google Street View image began to replace all other memories of her. It seemed to contain our whole relationship, and yet it was so blurry. I made it my mission to find another image of her. Each street view was a sphere. Each little sphere contained a potential memory, a possibility of finding her. But I would lose my mind if I were to try to look through every one of them. So I started to narrow it down. I went to every apartment we had lived in over the course of our relationship, spending 6 hours every day searching for another accidental capture of her. Perhaps I would find us together, holding hands, walking along the promenade, or sitting together on a park bench somewhere. But I found nothing. And in this day and age, I was sure it was impossible to disappear completely. My search became more and more abstract. At times I felt as if I were looking for her image in the very landscape itself. I started to believe the earth was a giant brain and I was tapped into all its nerve centers. Yet she still eluded me. I wonder where she is right now. I heard a rumor once that she was on a little island off the coast of Turkey studying a pre-Socratic fragment recently discovered by a team of Dutch archaeologists in an ancient catacomb. I loved that photo. It was a record of our life together. One day I returned to her image, and it was gone.
One afternoon, I traveled back to the edge of my memory. Images of the past, layered with nostalgia, obstructed my enjoyment of present beauty. I've often tried to turn away from the slow, heavy ache of the present, instead preferred the gleaming surfaces of memory. There was an inner chamber I could reach only by passing through these surfaces. This was the far edge of the real. It is told to properly lose one's way here, like somebody who loses their way in a mall parking lot, requires some training. When I finally managed to get lost, I discovered unknown corner after unknown corner, and would stop often to look at the scene before me. It always reflected something back at me, something I could not get enough of. Is not a tool for exploring the past, but a medium. It is the medium of experience. Just like the earth is the medium in which ancient cities lie buried. I try to approach my own buried past and need to conduct myself like a man digging. I have to go back again and again to the same matter, to scatter it like one scatters earth, to turn it over like one turns over soil.
So in both these works, again, it emerged out of this joy of exploration that eventually led to a more of a critical gaze, more almost trying to understand how these virtual worlds, these 3D worlds, these new, either in the case of Google Earth and Google Street View, or this video game virtual world, what it says about our society, or how it reflects, how I can use it as an entry point to a critique of modern life. And so with You, the World, and I, it's based on a true story, and I tried to reframe it a little bit to be more like the myth of Orpheus, except in the myth of Orpheus, you have Orpheus trying to bring back his lost love from the dead with the powers of music, of his lyre or lyre. But in my case, in the narrator, in the case of the narrator, he's trying to bring back his lost love with these new technologies. And rather than the love herself, it's actually just a record of the love. And I guess for me, in a lot of my work, I'm actually trying to use, rather than, I'm trying to use the technologies themselves to critique themselves, to kind of reveal the nature of of the alienation, of how, the nature of how they mediate our experience by using the actual material or the products of the technologies. And in the case of, for example, when I'm pulling from Second Life or these video games, I think what interested me most is not so much, it is almost like what's inspiring me is what everybody, and not only myself, is doing with these technologies. It's not so much the technologies themselves, but like what different users in the case of Second Life are making in these worlds, or in the case of the video games, these incredible landscapes that usually when you're playing the game, you're just supposed to pass over, and because your goal is to beat, the level. But I try to begin from the standpoint of like stopping to meditate on these virtual creations, and that becomes my main material. So, and I think, I mean, if you see that they're both of these films are first-person narratives. So, and I think one of the threads that ties all the work together is a sort of quest. This very classic, romantic quest to understand the self, but today, specifically in a world that is bereft of meaning, or is totally fragmented, where you have, like in Second Life, symbols from all epochs, all historical every culture floating around without any real context. So it's in a way I mean, and this is one of the classic uses of narrative. It's a way to try to create meaning, to create structure in a world that is completely fragmented and lacks any, is bereft of history and tradition. And I think I'm not trying to say I'm creating that structure. If anything, I'm trying to. These different characters are struggling to create meaning, to create a continuous narrative, a continuous self in a world that, and maybe they're failing, in a world that is completely bereft of tradition and history. And I'm not trying to necessarily bemoan that fact completely, because on one level, I really do believe that they're celebrations of, especially my explorations of Second Life, are celebrations of this sort of, this virtual world that is to me like a crazy, extreme version of Las Vegas, Dubai, and all these postmodern cities, but even like times 10 or a million. And I think something that I often say in interviews is like that. I think this line between this sort of mocking critique, this like ironic mocking of this kitsch culture, of these kitsch sort of, in many cases, they're not part of the art world. They're more outsider artists or fan art, or just people creating without any other goal other than the sheer joy of creating. For me, that's sort of like my great inspiration, and that I really want to kind of use these new vernaculars that have emerged and kind of bring them into my own practice. So, yeah. I'm not sure. I feel like I should stop here just to move on, and then maybe I'll bring up some other themes that I'm working with. But if anything, I think there is this. On one level, it's still this. I'm trying to draw a historical line between a classic, modern, or romantic quest for wholeness in a world that is completely fragmented and has no more center. So in a way, I don't see it as so new, but I see the materials as completely new, and these new technologies and virtual communities, subcultures emerging as having, as basically have a new mind of material for an artistic practice. And I think I'm excited because there's so many new subcultures emerging all the time. Maybe later I'll talk about this one, and they don't actually necessarily have to exist online, because I also made a film about professional video game players, which is a very real culture. But yeah, I'll end it there, and we'll come back to some of the themes.
Where I wanted to start was the title of the show. Whose narrative is it anyway? Because there's a lot of terms in there. And the first thing I thought, I was like, oh God, what is narrative? And who is this who? So I looked it up. So narrative is obviously a rhetorical form of expression or communication or discourse. Typically attributed to the creative disciplines, but we can probably do away with that nowadays. It's from the Latin for to tell, so it's pretty vague. And it applies to a description of events that are maybe related by some kind of cause-effect trajectory. But it doesn't say anything about whether or not the content or that series of events has any truth to it. And historically, or actually in plenty of languages, you don't make a linguistic distinction between history and story. So in French, you have histoire for both. The only thing that makes the distinction is the pronoun. A history versus the history, capital H. So it's quite attractively problematic that kind of highlights this troubling relationship to truth that I think Jon is exploring somewhat, or frankly manipulating. So anyway, to go back to the etymology a little bit, it's apparently not until like the 1500s that we start to make a distinction anyway between sort of a true historical narrative and a fictional one that's been made up for entertainment. So in light of that, today's topic is extremely nostalgic, much like the narrator in the film we just saw, or both of them, and romantic, as Jon said. So it goes back to quite an old preoccupation that in many ways modernism tried to throw out the window, to fragment with, free verse or streams of consciousness or multiple viewpoints of questionable reliability. We fucked with the sequence of events, we became absurdists, we became expressionists, we became kind of surrealists. We wrote entire treatises in fragmentary form. So to seek kind of, to discuss narrative or to talk about this quest for unity is quite, it's a return to something kind of pre-modern or primeval even. And I just as an aside, it occurs to me that a story, and I think this is also the case in lots of languages, is also kind of a euphemism for a lie. So there's like an inherent conflict between some kind of notion of real truth and something fabricated, just inherent to any discussion of narrative, I think. But I think we can embrace that ambiguity in a way. And another interesting thing I found when I looked up narrative in the online etymology dictionary, now you know my research secrets, was like 4 entries down in variations of the word narrative or narrator or narration. There was this entry that just said Robinson Crusoe, and then the definition was man without companionship, from the eponymous hero of Daniel Defoe's fictional shipwreck narrative. And I think it was just kind of like a search issue, like the word narrative was in the definition of Robinson Crusoe, thus it kind of appeared in this series of etymological entries. But it seemed extremely resonant here vis-a-vis what Jon is doing in these films, which is very much told from this standpoint of a man without companionship, or three degrees removed from companionship. So I find that quite interesting, that this allegory for the man alone is somehow in that rich archaeological resource that Jon is working from, this sort of stranded man is somehow linked. So, and of course, the man stands alone in this case. Again, that's a very romantic formula. Romantic as in capital R. Romantic, the romanticism of a Caspar David Friedrich, where you have these representations of the lone man confronted with a vast landscape and sort of surrounded by ruins, and he's sort of faced by himself against the picturesque, against the beautiful, against the sublime, most relevantly against the latter. Another etymological tidbit that was compelling was that romance was also just used to mean the recitation of a narrative, and like in Old French, a romancier was just first somebody who told narratives, and then later became somebody who invents fictitious ones, and that's where we get the word for novel in Romance languages. There's a lot in that. One side of it is that there's some kind of inherent untruthiness to romance, which is kind of interesting. But also in there is the idea that when we're looking at romanticism, we're looking at storytelling, which, as Jon implied. So not that I've answered the question, what is narrative here, but that kind of brings me to the other question I posed, which is, who is this who? In the whose narrative is it anyway? And we're up here representing the kind of art maker and art commentator, to break it down simply. So is it ours? Is it Jon's? Is it yours? Is it the historians? Is it the critics? Because it's not just the jurisdiction of the creative. The art critic or the art historian is constantly trying to signpost a historical narrative. That's why we were very quick to go to words like post-digital, post whatever you want. We just run right for it as though to signpost the way forward on this historical or critical narrative that we're all so much wanting to be a part of. Perhaps again, as Jon said, in this attempt to kind of overcome that fragmentation. And I'm reminded of another kind of figure in the romantic cliche, was kind of proto-romantic, which is the protagonist in Goethe's The Sorrows of Young Werther, who it's written in kind of epistolary format. Young Werther is writing to his long-suffering friend Wilhelm about Lotte, this, and this is 18th century, about this woman he's completely devoted to and completely obsessed with, and who remains unattainable for him, and it finishes in a almost botched suicide attempt. And it became a very, very famous book at the time. It turned Goethe into kind of the first literary star. And it's not a Bildungsroman in the sense that it's about a coming of age, but it's a Künstlerroman. It's like about the formation of an artist himself. So again, a kind of Robinson Crusoe figure stranded not on an island, but in Jon's case, online. Confronted not with this geographical sublime, but a technological sublime, which is one that is almost exclusive of beauty and very much contingent on this like grotesque sort of Second Life style pageant, for instance. Second Life dash style. And again, that work, You, the World, and I, it's using these romantic formulas, but it's giving us an additional degree of removal. So the ruins are there, the sublimity is there, but the pursuit is not of the intangible love object, but her image, obviously. So I don't want to say it's a post-romance or a neo-romance, but it's almost a meta one, where we're aware and additionally fixated on that intangibility. And the solution, as Jon already sort of pointed out, is an archaeological one. And in this case of his own subject, sort of this attempt to reassemble the fragments left there by all these modernist interventions, maybe, and to piece together that narrative that is at once historical and personal. It's about how we fit into the history as much as it is about this kind of sort of neurotic attempt to self-define we talk about professional narratives too when we're thinking about our next like career move or project. So yeah, the perhaps to just wrap it up, what Jon said, or what the part of the dialogue in the film is this kind of impactful quotation. Earth, I might be getting it wrong. Earth is the medium in which ancient cities are buried. So maybe this kind of archaeological quest for continuity allows us to kind of transcend the limitations of the medium, which is another reason we're obsessed with putting the suffix post on everything. Because the advent of some new technology somehow has to eradicate the last. But maybe within this romantic context that's completely unnecessary, and what we can do is actually build a whole. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it.
I have just prepared a few notes that just offer a viewpoint, not so much on Jon's work, but maybe on a historical context around it. As Victoria sort of introduced there, like narrative is clearly a very old thing, an old concept. So the fact that we're talking about it now and here and today seems like there's been some sort of resurgence in interest, or like a return in interest. And if this is true, then we can say it's some sort of parallax moment. And this is something Paul Neal talks about a lot, the idea of a parallax as a shift in viewpoint engendered by a new sort of technology that allows you to see an old thing in new light. So the assumption that we'd be working on here, if we're talking about narrative and technology, is that there's been an advancement in technology that creates new conditions for narrative, or even new forms of narrative. So I'm sort of curious as to what extent that's true, and what the implications of that are. But thinking through the technological split, I thought we could split it for simplicity into two main moments in sort of recent, aka last 10 years, or last 20 years history. And the first of these we can call the internet, or more accurately the World Wide Web, as invented in Switzerland in the late 80s and popularised as a consumer product in the decade after. In art history, we see the emergence of net art, which explores the relationship between the digital and the physical, what sort of emancipatory spaces this might engender, what new forms of creative expression could come out of this, and what ways these spaces could be used to critique existing societal conventions and perhaps also create new ones. Hey, I was wanting to put websites on the projectors, but this could be useful. Paradigmatic of this moment, and chose an example because it's really relevant to today's subject, is Mark Americas. You can see this as sort of taking this early moment of the World Wide Web and using it to create this idea of the cyborg narrator, or what you commonly understand as sort of the banal process today of just clicking through the internet and following links. So this work takes this process and sort of materializes it as an artwork. I can't remember there's a really good way to, yeah, here we go. Comes out with this kind of stupid quote, so I link Never I Am, which is like philosophically, like has a lot of holes in it, it's also really funny. And this is a sort of very straightforward example of the hypertext artwork. I'm sure you're, oh my god, I hate MacBooks. I'm sure you're familiar with the hypertext novel, or all these different forms of work that came out of this. This doesn't impose a narrative in the same way as a hypertext novel, which will have different segments of story that sort of like linked together by the random, the chance of which links you click on. But it still has this element of chance, and sort of the user, the surfer, creating their own narrative. So I thought it was quite an interesting example. It looks like we've run out of links. Oh no, it's a joke. And at the same moment in business, we get things like e-commerce and a dot-com bubble, in which hyperlinks facilitate the browsing through products. So you could look at loads of things really quickly and choose the right one and buy it. And so then, if that's the first moment, I feel the second moment is a bit more opaque and maybe harder to pin down on a timeline, and perhaps even still emerging. And this is, I think, best described as ubiquitous computing, or mobile computing, which is the diffusion of the internet away from PCs and across a number of integrated devices, such as smartphones, tablets, televisions, watches, and wearable eyewear. Well, obviously wearable, but presumably that'll be the next thing. So in terms of narrative, where narrative on the internet, as in this example, was broadly an encounter of hyperlinks, which creates forms of non-linearity as you go through it, arguably very similar to modernist projects such as Joyce's Ulysses, or even Finnegan's Wake, probably a better example. Narrative in the second moment is dispersed across different devices, creating something much nearer to multilinearity. We talked about Ryan Chakatan a lot on Second Life. He unfortunately wasn't able to join us, that we asked. And I think his work is a primary example of artwork today that investigates the psychological, if not maybe at this point in time, formal implications of this. But there's also a much more immersive offshoot of this, where worlds and narratives are constructed around the user for them to inhabit. We see this a lot across advertising, tech, and corporate branding at this moment. In advertising's gamification and social media marketing. In the tech world, there's new sorts of apps that change relationships with the city. So you can earn points for going to like London Fields and doing certain things and finding things. In literature and publishing, with digital publishing across iPads and Kindles, etc. Could we go back on the internet? And in the art world, I think a really good example of this at this moment is Interiors 2 by Jasper Spicero. Yeah, it's kind of slow. But also in general, I think this is sort of informs a way of looking at artwork through the Contemporary Art Daily matrix. And so whilst this artwork doesn't work literally across multiple mediums, multiple devices, for example, you're not forced to follow it on your iPad and your phone and the computer, although you can, I guess. It works across multiple mediums and situations. So there's sculpture in it, which is a range of materials, some physical and some 3D rendered. There's obviously images, there's music, which Jasper himself composed and made. And there's also this text, this sort of script. So a narrative, I think, is at this work's core and provides a way of linking these different scenarios into one coherent artwork or object. But it's also poetic and slightly fleeting and elusive in this sense. And the viewer has to finish it, not through choosing the right hyperlink, but bringing their sort of evocations and associations to it. So I feel that narrative seems implicit in this moment as a way to establish continuity and meaning between these different devices. And I think this is really similar to what... I'm going to go back to that. I think we understand this intuitively with our social media profiles. These are modes of performativity much more than archives at the moment, such as epitomised by Snapchat, obviously. And we trace people's persona between the different platforms, creating linearity conceptually as we like, poke, reblog, and message them across Tumblr, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc., often in no particular order, with no too rigid logic. And so I guess the question is, in what way is this a new form or conception of narrative? It seems that the linearity of narrative as a device is very much unchanged, and maybe is used as a reaction to this highly shifting state of social technology, as a sort of anchor to make sense of the dispersal of information across so many devices. given that these sorts of technologies have significant social, psychological, and political implications on the way we organise life, in what ways we can interrogate them and shape them within art seems a primary question. I think John touched on a similar point when he said the narrative's old, but it's using different materials. So I think that's maybe the key relationship. So I guess my question is no more simply than why talk about narrative, ? But maybe more precisely, if it's a way of bringing subjectivity to these technologies and these environments, in what ways can it be empowering? And in what ways does it reaffirm existing power and in what ways, conversely, does it reaffirm existing power relationships?
I basically want to open it up to the floor, and if anybody has any questions, otherwise we can have a conversation amongst us. But I'd rather have you guys start interacting with this. Anybody have any questions?
It's like a choose your own topic
Yeah,
adventure.
yeah.
I think
where we'll talk about whatever.
maybe
It's the heat, I think.
maybe if we start and then
Okay.
people can just understand
So
that
do you guys
this
have any
point
questions?
it's open. Maybe Omar can help us with that.
Yeah, Omar, ask some questions.
No, I'm waiting for you guys to start.
Whoa. I guess one point that I didn't touch on was, but was underlying the talk was my interest in, in memory and how through memory we construct our identities, and I think because I grew up playing so many video games and exploring these virtual worlds as a child, I think it had an important place in my formation as an individual. So I guess I part of a lot of my work comes from this desire to, I guess, investigate certain obsessions or even pathologies or neuroses that I have that have been, I get either caused by contemporary society or relate to personal experiences, and that's why the narratives often take on this diaristic memoir form. So a lot of the times I'll begin with like a deep obsessive, I think it's like a sickness or pathology that I have, and try to construct a character from that specific obsession or neurosis. So in the case of You, the World, and I, it was dealing with loss, specifically lost love. But and in the case of I guess in a way of this other film that I won't show right now, but Codes of Honor, which is about a professional video game player. Like it's partly in a way for me to cope with, the time I wasted in these online worlds or virtual worlds or playing video games, and in a way it can be seen as almost a quest to give meaning and redeem those hours spent through narrative, through constructing a meaningful story that justifies certain things. And even if it might be, and I think all these narrators, I hope, they remain somewhat unreliable because, they are, I think I try to have it so that there's a space between the viewer and the mind that you're trapped in. So like Nabokov or other writers who to use the first person perspective, I think there's a distance between the two. So I don't know. That's just, I thought I'd talk about the process. The process comes from this very personal way to investigate my own obsessions. And in the case of Second Life, it's like this deep interest in these subcultures that I actually never really got to. I always wanted to, do role playing in Dungeons and Dragons, but I never had friends that wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons with me. So anyway, now I get to go into these. I still feel like an outsider, but I get to go into these more like nerd cultures, and really I really respect them and take them seriously, and kind of observe them as an outsider, or I position it as like this flaneur figure, where instead of wandering the streets of Paris in the 19th century, it's wandering these online virtual arcades.
Do you think there's an ethical issue in filming other people?
Yes, definitely.
Second
I
Life.
think that's why. Part of the reason that I position it as also as an exploration, or me as this explorer, is that I think there is a colonial aspect of in going in and choosing what to archive, choosing what to document, choosing how to edit and frame it. So I don't think as an artist you can escape that ever. That there's a violence to art, and that it fixes things. But at the same time, I think it's necessary because these virtual worlds are so because they leave no actual physical ruin. Some of my documentation is all that remains of some of these, especially in Second Life, these virtual ones.
I think it's really interesting the way that you film through basically doing screenshots and screen captures, and that seems to be a completely different camera to the traditional camera, either the flaneurs like Hetzel or like the modern filmmakers sort of tripod camera. In the start of what's called Goodbye to Berlin by Christopher Isherwood, he talks about how his eye is like a camera, and he's like a camera being carried around capturing things. And this seems to be like a point and shoot thing, rather than just more I don't know, I'm wondering if the screenshot is a different way of capturing
Yeah.
things.
I find the edit to be really cinematic.
Yeah.
Like very much within the formula, which is kind of what's astonishing about it, because when you're in Second Life, you're kind of jerking around with your cursor, and it's really stunted and a little bit autistic, and half the people are kind of standing around like zombies. But in these films, particularly in The Man Digging, you get this kind of dragging out this epic quality, just speaking purely visually. And also what you in terms of how the music is edited and so on, it's got a very cinematic rhythm to me that's very much within kind of visual vocabulary, more of film than of Second Life. Maybe talk about it.
Yeah.
I was going to just follow on from that to ask where the sound came from, because it sounds like it's different in both of them.
The what?
Where the sound comes from.
Well, in the case of Second Life, in the case of You, the World, and I, it's I created the soundtrack on my own, and in the case of the Man Digging, it's a combination of me and the video game. So, I guess I'm on one level and bringing cinematic tradition into, so as opposed to, let's say, like we mentioned Ryan Carton, who's really creating a new formal structure that maybe responds to contemporary existence, where there's not one. It's kind of the opposite of what I'm doing, where you're inside one man's head, and it's like the singular narrative. There's multiple perspectives. They're highly fragmented. You can't really say what's exactly going on, but. In my case, I guess I'm trying to take these virtual worlds that are by their very nature open-ended and interactive, and you can choose what to look at. You're given a certain amount of freedom, despite the fact being somewhat trapped within certain constraints. And I'm trying to create a kind of more classical, in the tradition of romantic and modern literature, a narrative in that respect. So in a way, I'm bringing those elements into what is ultimately a choose your own adventure. So I'm kind of choosing the adventure.
You mentioned
Yeah.
what you said. I can't remember your phrase. You said that filming can be violent sometimes.
Yeah.
Do you think narratives can be violent?
I mean, yeah, and that they can't truly ever capture the truth of experience and history. So, but at the same time, I think they're necessary, and that otherwise we live in a world without history, tradition, and that's, I think, has less meaning. So in a way, there's that give and take where like you need the fiction to access the truth, and that there always is an element to the fiction. I mean, that's fiction, but it's kind of I think that's just the nature of reality, and that.
It also kind of harnesses the like voyeurism that's just integral to kind of interactive internet use, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm inspired by these worlds that I didn't create. Like nothing, in a way, it's also can be seen as like a giant project in which I'm just documenting what is already out there and just framing in my own narrative. I think it's important to me that these are other people's creations. And I mean, because I've seen things now. People wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire.
well, the violence is reciprocal is the implication there too,
Yeah.
right? In the same way that like autobiography involves some kind of like self penetrative force, kind of you have to excise yourself a little bit. It's the same, it's not. You can't go into Second Life without opening the window the other way a little bit. No.
I mean, this room is very violent. Maybe I'll turn it on.
One question.
Yeah.
Do you think this virtual reality sort of games, is it because of our fetish with the death itself, that it allows us to escape it at the end of the day, or we can see ourselves dying, but not in a sense us? And the second question, you can meditate on it sort of.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the second question, do you think this chair is real?
I think
No, I mean,
that
it's like I'm just affirming what I said.
No, I mean,
before.
speaking of real and virtual, I think what I'm trying to do is show how real this virtual world is. Like, I mean, I know the chair is real, but I'm also
How?
I
How?
also know that I also want to show that the emotions that are triggered and the experiences that one has in these digital realms are also extremely real and maybe more real than the chair in that they
I'm saying
admit.
that the chair doesn't exist there.
Let's not get too
No,
into
either.
epistemology. But my point is that there's an artificiality to these virtual worlds that admits itself, that is completely transparent, and they're in its transparency and it's pointing to its own fakeness, artificiality. It's more honest than maybe like certain constructed things we have in reality. Yeah, sorry.
I just wanted to ask, what risks do you feel you take, if any, when you make films like this? In the way that it's almost like a kind of online ethnography
Yeah,
of sorts.
totally. I mean,
If you were doing this in the wilds of wherever, there would
Yeah.
be certain risks you were taking.
Yeah.
Just wondering what risks you take.
I guess the physical risks are much less, but I think there has been recently, I don't know, at least I don't know, the art world's big, but in the art world that I'm aware of, like, is my community, a kind of a repulsion with the personal and kind of very emotional, sentimental, romantic way of making art that I do, and that is it's sincere. Even though there's an irony and a humor there, ultimately I think I'm sincere in the way a romantic might be sincere. So I think there might be a risk we take, but I don't know. Those are just trends, cycles that happen. So maybe I was just not on trend at the moment. So yeah, I'd say if I'd situate a risk, it would be more in just being vulnerable, revealing one's self so publicly, so directly.
Yeah, I think there's also this this like relationship between it's like much more. I don't think it's so straightforward because going through using these constructs of these worlds, like you can read them as very constructed and not yourself, and I'd be like quite concerned about there being like a much more like feminist discourse around like the first person work who's come to mind is Bonnie Rogers, being much more like to the core of revealing a personality and like a vulnerability. That maybe like through these things such as Second Life you can sort of master to a degree.
Yeah.
Which I think is like maybe the interesting sort of like.
But we're always masking, I think, and then really here I think like.
Yeah, I guess this makes that more visible.
I can't really hear you.
Sorry.
I have a question,
Okay.
and it's about time. And a lot of popular theorists like Nicholas Carr tell us that, the hyperlink nature of the media that we use means that our attention spans are much shorter, which means that we are less likely to engage with, say, a novel from beginning to end, etc. But one of the things that struck me when I was talking to you, John, was how long people spend in these virtual worlds exploring, crafting a story. And I was wondering, and in a sense, it's a very extrapolated, long durational experience, which is sustained, which kind of counters that kind of popular rhetoric that the internet has made us less able to engage substantially with a particular story or a particular narrative or a particular space. And I was wondering if maybe all three of you could talk a little bit to the notion of time and or engagement with particular spaces, whether we have become more attuned to particular spaces than others, for example.
Just to start, yeah, I mean, I think that's 100% true in that I often see the actual, these projects as very existential, lonely, meditative ones where I do spend an incredible amount of time just alone in these virtual worlds, wandering, like I'm doing right now. And I think it's just it's not necessarily, there is a fragmentedness to it, but it's also extremely directed, and there's a focal point of just the act of traversing vast territories, or just stopping to look at a virtual space. Yeah, and I think just like Second Life, just to speak about that existential sort of lonely, one man alone in confronting the environment, is pretty much how Second Life is. Which is why I like it, is because you're not given any goals. You're just thrown into this world, not given anything, not given any real direction. I mean, and then you're asked to figure it out. So. Yeah, I think that's partly why I like it a lot. Yeah.
Just to add to that question, I'm completely in agreement with your work,
Yeah.
I'm afraid. But
Yeah.
I wondered if it seemed very strange to me that you had this thing called a film which had been played on its desktop.
Yeah.
When I came in, I was really taken in by this atmosphere of us not knowing whether this was the lecture or not.
Yeah.
And I wondered how far you explored different formats in terms of the audience with your work. Because I mean, now you're kind of talking
Yeah.
about exploring this space and you're doing it as you're talking.
Yeah.
This
Well,
idea that you spend so much time in these, I've had this experience
Yeah.
when I used to play games when I was little, walking into these expanses, but it is that kind of existential reflection you have in
Yeah.
these times, which personally I haven't actually experienced through what you presented,
Yeah.
because they've been formatted in a certain
Yeah.
way. And I wondered if there was ever a more performative or any kind of different format you.
I mean, it's funny that you say that because this specific, what I'm doing right now was a project that ended a few years ago, where half the project was my documenting my travels, and the other half was actually doing this, giving tours of these worlds, trying to see what kind of people we meet along the way, and doing sort of a live critical commentary and asking audience to participate with suggestions of what kind of world to travel to. So yeah, I think the narratives I was trying to create almost like an essay film, some sort of statement, where I was investigating something very specific, while this, and until recently, I had to kill it because it just occupied too much time, where anybody could literally contact me and ask me to give them a tour of Second Life, and I would feel guilty if I didn't, so I had to kill that. But yeah, it existed in multiple forms, and maybe that one was more honest to the actual experience of virtual exploration.
Can I add
Yeah.
to the time thing? There's kind of what I was trying to say about the like post suffix. Like we're so quick to put these limitations on it, and we see a development, and we're like, oh my god, like the medium changed, the message must be different now, and it kind of like we allow it to undermine our sense of the story or our sense of what's true. And all these things, it's kind of like some kind of Marshall McLuhan reverberation. But I think it's precisely these kinds of discourses that are allowing us to extract from those kinds of really alarmist claims. I think they really throw the baby out of the bathwater in terms of what the medium is capable of, in terms of what we're capable of, and in terms of what old media is capable of too. I mean, the tools are the same. The tools are verbal, visual, and action-oriented, and they've always been that way. Before the printing press, they were that way. And now, post-internet, it's still that way. It's just the 3D effect has just gotten much better.
And I think you just, yeah.
I wanted to ask what you think, usually my narrative, not changing, but switching, but the way that affected nostalgia and reminiscence, and how we use nostalgia now as like a coping mechanism.
Yeah, I mean,
because you can just access, if you have nostalgia about a game, you can play the level again. It's instant.
Yeah. It's not the same though.
I guess what's interesting about that is that you can revisit these moments, and there's this uncanny or nostalgic feeling. But yeah, for one thing, it's not the same because your experiences are different. But I don't know. I guess there's so much to say about that, but I just want to park in on one specific moment that, to me, it's half nostalgic, half uncanny, and it's the feeling I get now when I visit a place that I've already been to virtually, like be it exploring not Google Street View, or like in Grand Theft Auto when they have an extremely realistic 3D version of a certain space in New York City or somewhere. And I think it's the nostalgia may be new, but just exist in a new form of like visiting a virtual version of it, like rather than seeing an old photograph. But now you have this new sort of uncanniness I don't think has existed before, where you can actually physically be in a space virtually before you actually are like physically there, like in reality. And that to me is really interesting. It may be an example of like something that is actually completely new, is that we can actually, and this relates back to like my interest in history, and I guess and memory too, is that now we can actually walk through and experience other historical epochs in these virtual worlds, in these video games, even though they're obviously complete constructs and not real representations of them, but they do affect the way in which we remember and in which we conceive of the past. So, I mean, just that is, I think, something that is new, even though it has existed in other forms. So yeah, I think those two are new things, the way we can now actually physically walk around like ancient Greece in a video game, and or at least virtually, and also the way we now can be in a place virtually before we actually be there physically.
It seems like that historical impulse is like one of the earliest qualities of video games too, like or computer games especially, like like Oregon Trail and all these things. Maybe because there was like maybe because it's like they're strategy based, so you're in like these war contexts, or maybe because they were originally conceived to be educational to some degree or somehow formative. But
or the past is like a virtual world, in a way, in the sense it is this construct that we can never know.
But it's always mediated by technology as well. Either it'd be like telling stories about campfire or like a history textbook.
Or the Rosetta Stone. Or
yeah, which are both sort of like fictitious things made to seem truthful and real.
More questions?
Can I ask a question about when you're just talking about this sort of experience of coming across something,
yeah,
going to Rome or to visit Rome in this situation? I'm interested in the different type of memory relation with your experiential and the gap that's sort of like involved there. And it's making me wonder as well about the use of this sublime kind of imagery, and the way in which the new tools do actually affect us in different ways, as well as just only being tools. So, it's a physical relation to that affects our memory works, the way in which we can talk, the way in which we communicate through those things. And I'm just thinking, historically, the sublime experience of being at a distance from something that was awe-inspiring or dangerous, or in some way there would be terror or horror of this experience, but at a safe distance. So I was just wondering what that might be like if you're involved in a...
Does the sublime imply distance?
Have you read Hito Stale in her new book? Has like this amazing, she makes this amazing claim about perspective and vision, saying that through these introductions to new technologies, the traditional Renaissance perspective of standing and like geometrically constructing the world and looking at it in front of you, as in the vista, as in like the romantic landscape, is now no longer like pertinent for a world with like Google Maps and these new technologies. And in fact, the predominant perspective viewpoint is free fall. I think the essay is called like in free fall. It's this aerial position of like groundlessness and like a floatingness, and then you construct the world differently around you. I just realised that obviously translates really straightforwardly to view the world in a way when you are literally floating and trying to work this out. But maybe then the sublime doesn't become this transcendental distance, but in fact this like imminent, being surrounded by all this
Well, I wonder about that,
information.
in the sense of it's... But I'm also thinking of a new way of experiencing that, which is much closer, which is, as you say, sort of a more imminent experience.
Yeah.
But I wonder, I would question Peter's outcome, actually.
Good.
Because of that essay, in the way that John's just spoken about memory in relation to these experiences of different types of space, I'm still intrigued. I don't think it's been answered yet. I think there's although I think it's a very
it's funny that you say sublime, because I often position or call my tours in search of the virtual sublime. I think even though I am genuine when I say I see a Kool-Aid man in Second Life as like some sort of romantic explorer, I don't think that the Kantian sublime can be experienced in such a mediated on a computer, because it's so heavily mediated by a screen. But I think for me, the sublime exists as more this intellectual concept of like how big the internet is, or how vast these virtual worlds are, and how they're being changed all the time by the users, and how it's literally inconceivable. You can't conceive them you can have an intellectual concept of the sublime, but you can't actually have you can't actually imagine it.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if I've actually experienced it the way a romantic might have experienced it in nature. But I definitely, I'm searching for it because I think it exists as a concept, online.
I think it's slightly related to Erica's question as well about risk.
And control,
Yeah.
and because the thing is, if you I'm sure that the
Yeah.
ideas of sublime have got something to do with being able to have control over the things that,
Yeah.
that create terror in you. So that's why I was
With
asking about
action,
risk
yeah.
as well.
Yeah. I think, in a way, I like the question. I guess the differences between the old Sublime and what I'm talking about is what I find interesting. I don't think it's what has changed. What is a Google Street View landscape? What does it say about the world versus the actual experience of a landscape in its earlier form? And I guess what I wrote in a little essay is that I see it almost as, or I see the Google Street View photography as a representation of this modern condition where it's a world that's completely captured by a company that's like just seeking to capture things as information. So in a way, it is this completely indifferent, non-human gaze of the Google camera that's just going around the world capturing information for the sheer desire to create a new feature to to Google Maps, versus me or anybody, the artist, the human, who looks at the images and sees meaning and interprets. And I think it's that, and sees narrative in the images. And I think it's that tension that I'm interested in, like this world of just pure raw information that has no meaning, that's just like organized by these bots or whatever, versus like me, who I'm constructing or trying to and failing to construct a coherent narrative of what I'm experiencing.
We have time for final comments from the three of you, and then we have to wrap up. So if anyone has any urgent comments, or if any of you have anything to say, do you want to lay it now?
I'm surprised to hear you say that you don't think that it's possible to achieve sublime, that sublime experience through the medium.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it almost seems like we're tripping on the hardware a little bit.
Yeah.
As it were, but because like the virtual sublime, just like completely abstractly, would just be some kind of technology-produced, transported experience. I mean, it doesn't have to come from a laptop or a...
But for me, it has to be, this whole idea of the sublime is that the subject rises over nature and the external world, and it realizes in that moment, even though it sees like the awesomeness of nature, like the infiniteness of nature, the human he or she realizes that she's actually the center of the world. It's like a true humanist experience.
Which I would question if it's possible. I mean, that's the real...
Yeah.
But also it's a kind of assertion of agency against the automatism of these bots and the kind of Google Street View.
Yeah.
It's there's an interesting thing around that to do with how much agency do these things have and how much do you have in this world.
Which seems to be your struggle.
Yeah, all these characters are torn between being agents and being just instruments of their obsessions caused by the external world or whatever. But yeah, no, that is kind of the core for sure. But yeah, I guess I don't think you can experience the sublime on a screen. There's something impoverished about the screen, and there's something that can't create the infinite. I think the concept can have, but I think the screen reveals our trappedness, and I think why I like these virtual worlds is partly because they reveal how we're trapped, because we're trapped in these worlds. I think they're more honest in that they so transparently show our trapping, how we're trapped. That makes sense. Any last comments, questions?
I think that's been really fantastic. Thank you so much, all three of you, John, Victoria, and Harry. And I think we could do a round of applause.